This Titan build is ridiculously powerful for Season 23 of Destiny 2. In today's video, we're going to break down exactly what to use, how to use it, and why this is so ridiculously good. Obviously, I've been using Syntheceps for a long time, but now that Bungie has buffed Worm God Caress, they are just so strong, and you definitely want to consider using them. You can continue to use your Synthecept Titan build because it's still very good, but if you want something new and different that offers a unique playstyle and offers a little bit more diversity in terms of what you can use, like what weaponry you can use when fighting different enemy types, this build right here is definitely for you. So Syntheceps is all about your melee is more powerful and your super is more powerful. Worm God's Caress is all about your melees are more powerful and your weapons are more powerful. So keep that in mind when you are popping your super for damage, that you will be doing a little bit less. That's kind of the trade-off that you have with this, but the trade-off feels worth it in my opinion, especially when I'm doing the coil activity. As you can see in the gameplay behind me here, you can just run through everything, even the bosses. So we're going to break down exactly what it is and how to use it. So we're using Strand Titan, using the exotic Worm God Crest. Let's go ahead and break down the subclass first. Obviously Blade Fear is the only option you get, so we got to choose that. Then we're using the Tall Wall. Occasionally I'll put this down to block sort of incoming damage, but overall you don't really need to use this, and you could potentially even use the Rally Barricade if you want to get your abilities back a little bit faster, but it's really not necessary for this. For this build, we're just going to be punching everything and shooting a ton of Sunshot, using our power weapons, whatever it is, because we get a nice buff to them. Catapult Lift is the usual lift. Every now and again I inspect Titans out there for the that join on me for LFG, and you guys are using High Lift. You need to stop using that. Don't use that. Use Catapult Lift. Trust. Then you have Frenzy Blade. It's the only melee option. Grapple is the one that I use just because it's fun. If you actually want to use a more powerful grenade for like Grandmaster's raids, definitely go with Shackle Grenade. I'm just using Grapple because it's fun to fly around and move fast. And I will say that Grapple Melee is extremely powerful. If you actually utilize the right setup, you can one phase the Ogre boss for Zia from Grasp of Avarice. So if you set up a Grapple Melee, like a grapple point, and keep grappling to it and hit it Grapple Melee over and over and over again, 1-2 punch shotguns to tie into it, that's an entirely different playstyle that you can use. That's not what we're talking about today, but I did see a video with someone using Worm God Caress and successfully one phase for Zia in Season 23 using Worm God Caress and using that playstyle. So you can also utilize that, but that's more for like ridiculously optimal DPS and stuff like that. I don't know if everyone's going to be using that. You're probably not going to use that in like a raid and stuff like with the team. It's more for like solo one phasing bosses and stuff, but it is literally, it's that powerful. But for the most part, for like Grandmasters, I'm just going to use Shackle Grenade. The aspects, there's only two options that you want to use here. It's going to be Into the Fray, which is destroying a tangle or casting a super, grants Woven Mail for nearby allies. This is super important, and this is where a lot of people go wrong. A lot of my crayon eating fellow brethren out there, they don't quite understand the gameplay loop and how to utilize it the best, and so they end up throwing their tangles the wrong way and not giving themselves Woven Mail, not getting their melee charges back, and they're wondering what they're doing wrong and why the gameplay loop doesn't work so well. And the next up is Banner of War, which is getting a melee kill, a finisher kill, or a sword kill. So if you have a sword on, it actually synergizes really well with this, but you don't need to. You can just get a finisher kill, and obviously you're going to be getting a million melee kills, so you're basically going to have infinite Banner of War, and that just gives you a periodic healing over time. If you have ×1, it pulsates a little bit slower. ×2, 3, and 4 pulsate faster, giving you more healing, but it actually doesn't increase your melee damage based on the ×1, 2, 3, or 4. So keep that in mind, that ×1 is just as good in terms of how much damage output you're doing with your melee, so it doesn't actually make it more powerful. And it's also important to keep in mind too that when that Banner of War is up, which it will be at all times because you're meleeing things, you do get an increase to melee and sword damage. So that's going to make your sword super powerful. As you can see in the gameplay behind me here, I'm able to melt bosses with the melees and the sword combos while doing the coil activity completely solo. For the fragments, it's very important that you pick the right ones. We have Thread of Fury, which is damaging targets with a tangle, grants melee energy, and that's going to tie into the loop that we'll get into in just a moment. Thread of Generation, dealing damage with grenade, generates grenade energy. This actually doesn't tie into the build that we're using here. It's just one of the better options because, you know, why wouldn't you want some more grenade energy, especially if you're using those grapples to get around, or if you're using shackle grenades to suspend targets and stun unstoppable, stuff like that. The third one is Thread of Warding. This one is essential. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. We'll be making orbs through a variety of different sources, and it'll be really important because that Woven Mail still gives you 45% damage resistance, even though Bungie just nerfed it. It was, when Lightfall came out, 60%, and then they nerfed it to 55 and now 45, and it's still ridiculously powerful for two reasons: because you have heals with damage resistance, which adds multiplicative survivability, basically. Like normally if you're on like a solar class, you can, you know, throw a healing nade at your feet, you can pop a rift, you can use a variety of different sources to heal, but to have the ability to heal and acquire damage resistance is just ridiculously powerful. Incredible survivability. That's why this is the class that I'm going to be bringing into the dungeon for day one, so keep that in mind. If you're out there, if you're Titans out there, this is the class I'm bringing into dungeon for day one to get that beat. Then we have Thread of Transmutation. While you have Woven Mail, Weapon Final Blows create a tangle, and that's going to be really important because we want to have another source of getting those tangles, and occasionally we will use our weapons weapons because we do get a 35% damage boost to them because we're using the exotic. It's a part of the buff for Wormgod Caress that when you get max stacks of Burning Fist, you're going to get 35% more weapon damage. That's going to tie in extremely nice for this one. Let's explain the gameplay loop here. All right, you're spawning in, whatever activity you're in, doesn't matter. The first thing you want to do is get a melee kill using Frenzy Blade. Obviously, we don't have Syntheseps on, so we're not surrounded anymore. So keep that in mind. When you're surrounded, you usually do more melee damage. If we're not doing that playstyle, then when we use this, we just want to get a kill with it, and that's going to get Burning Fist started. That's going to get ×1 stack. From there, you can use more Frenzy Blade until you run out, of course. But when you do get a kill with this, what's going to happen is a Tangle is going to spawn in, and it's very, very important that you take the Tangle, you walk up to an enemy, and you smack it in the face with it. You literally want to just throw that Tangle, hit the enemy in the face, and hit yourself. Hitting yourself with the splash damage of the Tangle equals Woven Mail for you. Hitting the enemy with the Tangle equals melee energy, and that's what you get from here as well. Not to mention that also ties into the fray, which is that when you get Woven Mail, your melee regeneration rate is increased. So it's two parts, right? As long as you make sure to take those Tangles and throw it into the face of the enemy, and like when you're facing them, very close to them, then you're going to get on two different fronts melee energy regenerated. You're going to get a chunk of energy for hitting the enemy, and then you're also going to create a faster regeneration rate for yourself. And that's the key to having infinite melees with this and getting your Burning Fist ×5 stack really high, really fast, and doing super powerful melees on bosses, majors, champions, whatever it may be. So that's the overall gameplay loop that you're doing with that. And then the last bit, of course, is that you can then pick up orbs, which will give you Woven Mail, which will then also tie into it perfectly, like we mentioned, and you're going to get that from Heavy Handed. You'll pick up the orbs, that gives you Woven Mail. The orbs come from Heavy Handed and from Hands On and from Solar Siphon, I meant to say. And then also you have Reaper on, so you have 3 different sources to create orbs, and that's going to give you basically infinite Woven Mail. And remember, when you have the Woven Mail, your melee regeneration rate is increased. You always have Woven Mail, you always have 45% damage reduction, you always have Banner of War because you're meleeing stuff infinitely, you're always healing. It's impossible to kill you. You're literally God mode when you have all of this stuff procced. When you have Woven Mail and you have Banner of War ×4, even if you have 2 or 3, you're in God mode at that point in time. You're chilling. You can see in the gameplay behind me here, I am surrounded by Wyvern and a million Vex. It literally means nothing to me because I'm freaking Titan with this build, right? And then lastly, when you have Woven Mail, the weapon final blows create a Tangle. So then this is the time to use your Sunshot if you ever shoot the Sunshot at all, which personally, I just like punching things, you know? Maybe I've eaten a few too many crayons. I just like punching things nonstop. But if you do shoot your weapon at enemies, it'll create a Tangle. So you shoot the Sunshot, you get 35% damage boost on top of other boosts that we'll go over in just a minute. Or maybe you shoot a machine gun or whatever you shoot. Shotgun, doesn't matter. Whatever weapons you like, really you can pick any. And that'll create a Tangle. If you melee something, it'll create a Tangle. And then you know what to do as soon as that Tangle spawns in. You want to grab it and you want to throw it in the face of an enemy. And so we're just going to have Tangles left and right, Woven Mail all over the place. So now let's go through the weapons I was using. Obviously, I just use Sunshot just because I like it a lot. You could use anything though. It's just really, really powerful. Does an increase like 40% more to red bar enemies because it's an exotic and it recently got buffed. Hand cannons are doing like crazy damage to majors now. Sunshot is just such a good exotic. Probably my favorite exotic primary weapon to use no matter what the activity. And then we are using Swordbreaker and we got 1-2 punch. The enhanced 1-2 punch is nice too because I think you can miss a pellet and you can still get a proc. So what you do is you shoot a high value target like a Wyvern champ and then your punch is going to be even more powerful, but make sure you have Burning Fist ×5. Otherwise it won't be powerful enough maybe to kill them. But this is really, really nice. This is how you're able to melt bosses. This is key to this build and this loadout. And you can use any shotgun that has 1-2 punch. You don't have to go craft the Swordbreaker. There's like a million shotguns that roll it. So just find one, pick one, doesn't matter. I like to use this one because it's in the kinetic slot. And then it also has demo, which is nice. And so every time I hit my grapple, it'll reload my weapon. Or you can throw your shackle grenade, it'll reload your weapon. It's really nice. I was using Pugilist here a little bit just because I needed a little more melee energy. But now I've gone back to my demo role. I think that this is the better role overall. But if for whatever reason you are struggling, I guess technically you could use a Pugilist role, but I think that the demo role is better. And then the sword is just an E-Greg sword. But sometimes I do use this Bequest. And in the gameplay behind me, you'll see that we've got the enhanced surrounded. We're able to just run through enemies and mow down bosses and stuff. So, and it also ties in perfectly with Banner of War. Now let's go through the exact armor breakdown, what we're using and why we're using from head to toe. On the helmet, we have Hands On, which is gain bonus super energy on melee kills. I don't even need to explain this. We're obviously running around punching everything. We're Titans, right? That's what we do. This is what Wormgod does the best. You want to punch everything because you need to get your Burning Fist stacks up. Every melee kill you get gives you 1 more stack. So you're wanting to punch everything anyways. And then in doing so, you're going to get your super that much faster. And then if you do use your Sunshot or any other weapon that you like to clear ads with, then you're going to create an Orb of Power. You don't have to use Solar Siphon necessarily, but because I'm using Sunshot, I'm using Solar Siphon. If you're using a Void weapon, use Void Siphon. Now on to Wormgod Caress and its crazy buff and changes that Bungie made this season. Is very, very fun, very, very good exotic now. Burning Fist, defeating a target with melee or finisher, grants escalating melee damage, which decays over time. The verbiage here literally melee matches Banner of War perfectly, right? Banner of War is get a melee kill, get a finisher, and you get Banner of War. You also can get a sword kill, so keep that in mind. And keep that in mind that sword kills are not going to progress your Burning Fist, so be wary of too many sword kills, right? You want to get melee kills and finisher kills, so if you see something finishable, obviously hit the finisher on it, and we'll go over that in just a moment because there is a mod you'll put with that. And then we have higher levels of Burning Fist grant increased weapon damage, and that one's really key. Once you get up to 5, you're obviously doing really powerful punches, and your weapons are really powerful. That's a dream come true, you know? Your damage output is just crazy. You're a Titan, you're running around punching things, and then suddenly your weapons do crazy damage, and your punches do crazy damage. Beautiful. You couldn't ask for a better buff. Love that change from Bungie there. On the chest piece, make sure you have melee damage resistance, because this is proximity. You're going to be in the face of everything. You will definitely want this. And then Arc and Solar doesn't really matter. You can pick whichever one for the activity. Like, for example, if there's a bunch of Void stuff shooting you, then pick Void's resistance. Now moving on to the boots for this build. First up, we have recuperation. So we're going to pick up an Orb of Power, and that's going to give us a little bit of health, but also keep in mind that's going to give you Woven Mail too, so you're going to have that damage resistance. If you're low health and you pick up an orb, you're going to get a chunk of health and 45% damage resistance immediately. So that's like a game changer for sure. If you're ever weak, if you ever need to pick up an orb, it's going to be there for you, especially when you create a ton of orbs from all the melee kills or sunshot kills. It'll be next to impossible to die because there's just orbs pouring everywhere because of all the ad kills you're getting. Whether you're doing it with the melee, sunshot, machine gun, whatever weapon you're using, this makes it so good. You'll definitely want to use. I use this for almost every build. Next up, we have Orbs of Regeneration. This gives you 10% ability regen based on whatever ability is the lowest. I like this one quite a bit. You could just use Innervation, really. It doesn't matter too much. I just like this one because occasionally you mess up your gameplay loop, right? And you're out of melees and you're like, now what do I do? You know, well, sometimes this tends to help because it gives you some ability regeneration in the lowest one. So I use this one, but it really doesn't matter. And then lastly, we have Solar Weapon Surge just to buff the sunshot damage even that much more. You could use it for your power weapon though. Like for example, I could have used it Arc Weapon Surge for the sword and it probably would have been better. So this is a 10% buff to whatever weapon you want. You could do whichever weapon you're trying to buff. Don't matter too much. Probably your power weapon though, but since I'm just shooting a bunch of ads, I just decided to buff Sunshot. All right, so moving on down to the class item now for this build. This one is really important. Proximity Ward, you're going to be hitting finishers for your Burning Fists, and you're going to be hitting finishers for your Banner of War. So you want to have this really powerful overshield, especially because when you're in the middle of the finisher animation, I don't know what happens, but there's just always stuff shooting you, you know, darts flying at you, especially in the coil activity or whatever it may be. So Proximity Ward is a must for this build and feels really nice. You'll notice that whenever I finish something, I get a really powerful overshield. Sometimes you're like in desperation mode, you're like 1 HP, and then you hit that finisher, get that overshield, it's really nice. Banner of War is procced all of a sudden, Burning Fist is procced, and then you can continue to go from there and heal up and start to punch things like crazy. Definitely essential to this build. And then we have Reaper. This is not essential to this build. I just decided to use this because if I do put a wall down and then I get a weapon kill, like with Sunshot kill or whatever it may be, it'll make another Orb of Power, which I can then go pick up, get Woven Mail, and continue the gameplay loop. Not entirely necessary, but there wasn't really anything else that tied into the build extremely well. And then lastly is Powerful Traction, which is if I do put that wall down, it'll pick up all the orbs nearby, which is just a nice mod. I like this one overall. I like when the orbs come to me, or when I'm able to, when I don't have to just chase them down and go after them, because sometimes that can be really inconvenient, especially when you're trying to put together a sequence of damage combinations on the boss or whatever it may be, right? So Powerful Traction is my favorite mod in that slot, in the class item. Going through the stats, you don't need any mobility for this build, that's for sure. You're going to want 100 resilience, of course, if we're doing challenging content. And the next most important stat is going to be your strength stat, actually, because you want to get as much melees back as you possibly can. So we got 80 strength, we got 80 discipline, and then the next important stat after your discipline and strength is just going to be recovery. Intellect's not going to matter much at all. We will get some intellect made up for with the hands-on mod, so don't worry. Even though I do have 10 intellect, which seems pretty low, like I would never get my super, it doesn't matter too much. I got hands-on, so I'm able to get supers back relatively fast. Now for this build, in Season 23, we have obviously Strand Fragments, Strand Aspects, and really the only two that pair with it are going to be these two in the top right corner here, Unraveling Orbs and Horde Shuttle. Unraveling Orbs reads, picking up an Orb of Power grants Strand Weapons Unraveling Rounds, which is actually pretty cool because, of course, we're making a ton of orbs, so that means if we're using a Strand Shotgun like the Swordbreaker, right, this is going to have Unraveling Rounds, which basically does a small amount of damage over time to enemies, so definitely select this one for the build. And then next we have Horde Shuttle, which is damaging unraveled targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a Threadling. So then on top of unraveling them, which is going to do a small damage over time, we'll also create a Threadling that's going to be a little minion that seeks out and does a little bit of damage to another target, so that actually has some decent synergy with it, but it definitely is not going to make this build ridiculously more powerful by any means. It's just like a little bow on top for Season 23. All of the other mods here, some of them have some application, like obviously we want to use this one, for example. This one is really important as well. Increase ability damage to taken and scorned combatants, so that way you do a little bit more of your melee damage damage to the taking and scoring enemies. That one's important. Definitely select that. This one could also be used as well while your super is nearly fully charged. Ability Final Blow, spawn orbs of power, just creating even more orbs, especially if you have the Season of Wish armor. But really your main goal with this build is to get punches, get Burning Fists up to 5, and then punch stuff or shoot stuff at that point in time. Super powerful build. The dim link to this will be down below. If you want to click that link, you can equip all of the items and mods onto your character very simplistically. If you enjoyed the video, click on the screen here to watch another one from the channel. Smash the like button. I'll see you in the next one. Later. And if you're feeling thirsty out there, make sure to use code LUCKY10P to save some money on G Fuel. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitch and Kick. I go live all the time playing Destiny 2. Lastly, make sure you're following me on X, Instagram, and TikTok, where I deliver Destiny 2 news to you daily. I appreciate all the followers out there.